The brain, a complex mystery organ that influences everything a person does, thinks, or feels. Life after a brain injury can feel just as mysterious and complex, trying to navigate services, experiencing potential isolation, different functioning, and much more. The rehabilitation process can impact the person as well as their supporters. It's often filled with ups, downs, and everything in between, all while the brain is relearning and making new connections within. Join us as the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina sits down with brain injury advocates to discuss a variety of topics surrounding life after brain injury. The more we understand the different aspects of services and effects of brain injury, the better we can help make connections within our community for individuals living with a brain injury. This is Making Connections. Today, we're going to talk about employment or having a job after a brain injury. Hello, thank you for joining us today. We're talking about employment and brain injury and how that kind of intersects in the brain injury community. I'm here with Ashley, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about what her experience has been working with individuals with brain injury. And so, Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the brain injury field?
Yes, so my name is Ashley McKenna. I'm the unit manager of the Durham office with Vocational Rehabilitation. I have been in the field for coming up on about 9 years. And what brings me to this field is knowing that disability impacts everyone in one way or another. And what's very interesting about brain injury is that there are no two brain injuries that are alike. They affect everyone differently. They affect the family unit differently. And supports have to be so incredibly individualized in order to serve that person and serve them well on their road to recovery, whatever that may look like after a brain injury occurs.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've seen and is so true, and everyone's journey is just so different. There's no possible, checklist that would be able to capture every person's experience. It just doesn't exist, unfortunately. And so how would you describe kind of your experience working with individuals with brain injury, maybe as compared to others, or what does that kind of look like?
So going back to how individualized everything is, you have to take a very holistic approach and recognize that everyone's recovery is not going to be the same. People don't go at the same pace. So, sorry, can you tell me the question again?
Yeah, no worries. Just kind of describing just your experience. So, were you always kind of working with individuals with brain injury? Was it something that do you work with them very frequently? What are some of maybe the challenges that you've experienced working with individuals with brain injury?
Okay. So my experience with brain injury has been very interesting. Sometimes we're getting a referral for someone who has had a very recent brain injury and they're very early in their recovery and what their life looks like post brain injury. And then a lot of times we're getting referrals for individuals who don't realize that the impact that they're experiencing later in life when it comes to difficulties with employment is because of a brain injury that they sustained in the past. So we'll look through medical records and we might see that there was a concussion, a car accident, indications of loss of consciousness, and that never has really been explored. A lot of people get discharged from a hospital after a brain injury with very little follow-up because they don't have physical symptoms. But with the brain and how complex it is, symptoms can manifest later in life beyond the time of the injury, and the brain can work to heal and repair itself. And so the side effects can change over time. So brain injury is just so incredibly unique that each brain injury presents a different set of challenges. But I think what is so interesting about it is that you have an opportunity to be that person's guide through this process. And employment plays such an important role in someone's recovery because it gives them purpose and it gives them a feeling of worth and accomplishment while they work through what life after a brain injury looks like.
Yeah, I think those are really excellent points. Just the meaningfulness of employment. I mean, I know that when you go to meet somebody or anything, they're asking you, what do you do and how do you spend your day? And I think it's hard for a lot of individuals with brain injury to either be in limbo in that process or still trying to figure it out. And being able to even connect socially in that way, so that's the way that employment just is kind of in this in American culture, is typically that is where you spend a lot of your time. So you mentioned it being a process, and you mentioned vocational rehabilitation. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what vocational rehabilitation is and how that process exists for individuals with brain injury?
Yeah, so the process is really just getting connected to the local office. So vocational rehabilitation does serve all 100 counties in North Carolina. And in fact, each state has their own vocational rehabilitation program. All of them are federally funded through RSA. And so it's accessible to everyone. Anyone who may have a disability, especially a brain injury, should get connected to vocational rehabilitation for help navigating what that return to work looks like. So the process is you get connected to your local office, whichever one is closest to you is a great place to start, and you call and you just express an interest in services. Generally, they'll give you an overview of what to expect, what that process looks like, and they'll get you connected to a counselor who will then take an application. During the course of the application, we will try to figure out as much about the person as possible. What do they feel their disability is? Are they seeing anyone for medical treatment or psychological treatment? Are they taking any medications? Are they in any types of therapy? We want to get a picture of the whole person and understand as much as we can about what's going on and how they're impacted by the disability. And in many cases, people will have multiple disabilities. And so we want to take that holistic approach so that we can be sure we're not missing anything. We want to be very thorough. And that's what we call part of the comprehensive assessment, is really understanding what is the disability, what are the limitations as a result of that disability, and what are the needs as a result of those limitations. And then where we come in is providing the services to address those needs. So for example, if someone has a relatively new brain injury and they're still working through what the return to work looks like, they haven't explored work, we might do a vocational assessment to see if their interests have changed. We might assess something like stamina or motivation to get an idea of, can they return to work they've done in the past, or are we looking at a completely new field entirely? And a counselor will be with them throughout this entire process.
And I know that that process can be sometimes, lengthier than someone would like, but there's so much information that you want to be able to capture to be able to create that kind of holistic approach. Do you find challenges with, some people may either not have as much awareness with maybe some things that might be more challenging to them after a brain injury? Do you find that, how do you kind of navigate that kind of experience if someone kind of wants to do a job that might be a little bit out of their wheelhouse? How would you kind of navigate that?
So the best approach to helping someone realize their current abilities is to help them understand that they're in control of the process, that they are leading the services, and that they have input about the next steps, about how this process is going to go. So we try to help people see it as their own idea. We want to give them as much information as possible and help them to understand that if you have a goal, we want to help you reach that goal, but it may not always be in the path that you had anticipated, or it may not be the exact job goal, but we can work to get you in the same field. We'll have a lot of individuals that are interested in working in the medical field, and sometimes they want to be doctors, and that's just not feasible for everyone. And so we try to explore that a little bit further. What is the motivation behind wanting to be a doctor? Do you understand how people become doctors and what that educational process looks like? Do you understand the complexities of financing a career to become a doctor? And how can we help them better understand what can get them in the field that they're interested in, but still at the level that meets their abilities and makes them interested and happy to go to work every day. So for someone who may have a brain injury and was wanting to get into the medical field, we want to assess stamina, we want to assess motivation, we want to assess cognitive abilities, memory retention. So that really starts with a lot of assessments. We will try to put that person in a simulation of a medical practice, whether it's in a hospital that we have an existing relationship with, or developing a new relationship with the medical practice down the street from where they live, to give them an opportunity to try it out. That might look like a job shadow, it might look like an internship, or it might look like a community-based assessment or a supplemental evaluation. There are so many different ways we can put that person in the scenario to give them an opportunity to try it. And then usually once you've gone through what it takes to do that job and you've given them the opportunity to simulate that job, they'll come to their own conclusions that either, yes, this is what I want to do, or maybe I'm not ready for that yet, but I could work my way up to it, or this job is not at all what I expected, and I need to rethink what I'm interested in and find a new interest.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of things that you could potentially do, but then I really liked how it wasn't like, oh, you don't tell the person you can't do that, or, stopping their dreams or goals, at the forefront. Like, explore it a little bit more, try it out, and, if the individual still wants to work towards it, go on, do your thing. But, if not, then maybe how can we pivot so that the same purpose and meaning and goals are achieved, just maybe in a different kind of way. I love that. Are there any sort of myths or stereotypes that you've come into contact with, either with people with disabilities in general related to employment, or specifically individuals with brain injury? I know that, some people think that after a brain injury, maybe their lives can't, they can't go back to work or anything like that. Have you heard anything about that, and what do you have in response to that?
So my experience has been the best success in returning to work after a brain injury is returning to the same place of employment. It may not be the same job and in the same capacity, or may not be full-time, but returning to a very familiar environment. And it does so many things to speed up that recovery process. By having that familiarity, the social aspects of socializing with your coworkers, the structure of returning to a place that you are familiar with before the injury, and the expectations of doing a job that you may still have some muscle memory from. So I think employers being open to working with people who need accommodations after an injury, more so than they might have before an injury, is pivotal in somebody's recovery. My best experience was working with a young gentleman who was unfortunately hit by a car on his way home from work. And he was in recovery for months and months and months, and he wanted to go back to work. He got a lot of self-worth and confidence out of his ability to do his job and to do it well, but we knew that he wasn't ready to return at the capacity he was working before his injury. So I sat down with the employer and I just was honest with them. I said, here's the situation. He really wants to come back. He enjoyed his work here. He enjoyed the people he worked with, and he felt like this was a very family-oriented environment, and he's looking forward to the opportunity to come back. What can we do to make that happen? So we talked to the employer about his expectations, the employment needs, and what that process would look like. And we developed a service plan that eased him back into the workplace at a pace he was comfortable with. So we had our evaluator go in and identify the job itself, the job description, the tasks associated with it, and the abilities needed to perform those tasks. And we carved out a set of tasks that we knew he could do. We made sure that they were physically accessible to him, that he could be seated, take breaks as needed, and who he was going to go to if he needed support on site. And the first week I get a call from the employer saying, I don't know what's going on, but he's picking it up again. Like it's like he never left. And just being back in that environment brought it all back to him. And within the 4 months that we did this on-the-job training to get him reacclimated to the workplace, he went from using a wheelchair 100% of the time to using a walker to a cane and then walking independently. And I want to say by the end of the first month, his employer called me and said, you're not going to believe this. I've got an update and I'm really excited to see where this is going. And the employer tells me not only is he back doing the job that he was doing before he left, but he was now reminding other people that they were doing it incorrectly. So he went from really not remembering the job, but remembering the atmosphere that he left, to just being on site and reacclimating and getting that muscle memory back. And people were just embracing him and remembering who he was pre-injury, really just sped up his recovery. And his doctors were amazed, and his employer was just so happy he was back. And that they could be a part of that process. And of course, his self-confidence was back. And so it was a really beautiful situation. And it takes an employer being willing to give someone an opportunity. And when working with vocational rehabilitation, we recognize that at the end of the day, businesses, especially small businesses, have a bottom line that they have to meet. And hiring someone with a disability who may need additional time for training or takes longer to learn a task can affect the business profit. So we're here to help offset that by offering the additional training, doing paid internships where we pay for the wages in order for them to learn the job and get that paid experience, with the hopes that the employer will take them back on. So there are some ways to meet that business need while helping that person get back into the workforce. Another myth would be that disabilities are visible. A lot of disabilities are not visible, and you have to be willing to believe that person and what they're asking you when it comes to accommodations, and give that person the opportunity to perform the job with the requested accommodation to see that it is beneficial. It's beneficial to everyone to have an inclusive workforce. And you just be amazed at how much more loyal and committed employees who are accommodated are to an employer. And then another myth would be employers are often nervous to hire people with disabilities because they're worried if it's not a good fit and they let that person go, that they're opening up themselves to a lawsuit. And that's not always the case. The Americans with Disabilities Act is there to protect the individual with a disability, but the employer also has some rights. And the way that it works is the person still has to perform the job as described. If at the end of the day they can't perform the job, whether it's because of the disability or not, that's okay. You gave them an opportunity, and now they know how to move forward for their next opportunity. Is this a job I can do? Is this a job I like? And what did I learn from the experience? So employers often don't give people opportunities because they're scared of legal repercussions, but I would encourage employers to talk with vocational rehabilitation, talk with an ADA expert, and really learn what that process looks like so that they can be more open to having an inclusive workforce.
Absolutely. And I love the story about, the experience of going back to work and how it not only impacts the person in terms of having a job, but their rehabilitative goals were even, sped up. And that relationships with the employers are just so vital and important. But there are a lot of supports and ways to really see the value in hiring individuals with disabilities and, and brain injury in particular. You talked about the different types of accommodations that were helpful for that person that you were working with. Are there other types of accommodations that you see most common, and how are they often used in different settings?
Yeah, just like services for individuals with disabilities through vocational rehab, the list of accommodations is so incredibly long, and everything is very individualized. So oftentimes people come to us and they don't know that, one, you can even get accommodations to complete a job, or two, what accommodations would be most appropriate for them. So we do have some assessments to help with that as well. In terms of physical accommodations, we want to make sure the workspace is accessible for any type of rehabilitation technology needs. So rehabilitation technology could be a wheelchair, could be a cane, it could be a walker, and we're looking at the accessibility of the workplace, getting in and out of the building itself, getting to and from the workspace within the building, and amenities such as like a bathroom or break room, and just making sure they can navigate those spaces safely. And if they can't, in the current state, what would the process of upfitting that space look like? And is that something that our agency can assist with, or is that something that the employer could do relatively inexpensively? So to give you an example, I worked with an individual at a Home Depot, and he was able to use the bathroom independently, but because he was transferring from a motorized wheelchair to the toilet, he had to get some grab bars. The ones that were already in the handicap stall were not conducive to his particular physical disability. So with Home Depot being a place that sells a lot of tools and equipment, they were able to upfit that bathroom space in-house. They didn't have to send, out for a contract to get somebody to come and do it. The employees actually upfitted that space for him. So that was a pretty simple fix. They just needed our engineer to come in and help them navigate what that would look like. So we do have rehabilitation engineers, and their job is to make sure that the space is accessible for what the person needs to be able to do that job. And then some other accommodations for individuals who have a mental health diagnosis. We would expect an employer to be accommodating so that they can schedule around their mental health appointments. And sometimes accommodations might be taking a 5-minute break when needed. So if they get worked up with an interaction with a customer or a coworker, rather than reciprocate or retaliate in that conversation or whatever has frustrated them, being able to take a break, go outside, walk a lap, get some fresh air, and come back to that space with a more level-headed approach. For someone with a brain injury, you could see cognitive limitations, physical limitations, behavioral changes. So just having an employer who's willing to have that conversation and understand that the purpose of the accommodations is to help them perform the job satisfactorily as the job description is written. It's not there to get them out of doing work. It's not there to get around them doing the full job description. It's there to support them to meet all the expectations of the job. We also offer things like job coaching. So if an individual struggles to retain information, and to be fair, like the first day of work for anyone is nerve-wracking and anxiety-producing. And a lot of times things are one ear out the other because you're just so overwhelmed. It can be difficult to retain things from one day to the next, those first few days on the job. The job coach can be there, elbow to elbow with that person, as a second set of eyes and ears to gather that information, take notes, and help the new employee reflect back on it. What are the expectations? Who is the contact person? What's the protocol for signing in and out? What are my essential job tasks? And then as they work those next few days on the job, it's a possibility to have a job coach with them to make sure that they are learning that task as expected. And that makes sure that the employer isn't having to spend any additional extra time with that person training them. They only have to train once, and then the job coach is there to make sure they master that task. So job coaching is probably one of our more popular services, and it's definitely beneficial to a lot of the clients that we work with.
We'll be right back.
I'm Thomas Henson with Henson First Attorneys. My professional passion for over 30 years has been representing brain injury survivors and their families. I'm a certified brain injury specialist by the Brain Injury Association of America. This, combined with my legal training and experience, allows me to ensure that whoever is responsible for my client's brain injury, whether due to a car crash, workplace injury, or other cause, is held fully accountable for my client's financial and personal losses. Visit us at lawmed.com for more information or to set up a free consultation.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of supports out there, and there's so many different types of accommodations that there's again no complete list, because there's always a way to like modify something. And I think some people get kind of hung up with like, oh, an accommodation has to be this high tech, or always kind of changing the structure of everything, when it could be as simple as taking breaks and having that just sort of built in, or having checklists for their schedule or anything. They can really be with low, minimal cost to the employer at some times, and like you said, kind of just allowing the individual to have the same amount of productivity just with those extra supports. So that's yeah. Are there ways that you would suggest like better communicating and engaging individuals with brain injury? Some people have difficulty with processing or being able to express their thoughts as easily as someone without a brain injury. Have you noticed anything that you do differently, or that other people can do to help just have more positive interactions with individuals with brain injury, either on the job or in the VR kind of employment office?
Yes, I would say the primary thing to consider is that you're getting the feedback about the person directly from the person. A lot of times when someone sustains a brain injury, especially a really significant one that really impacts activities of daily living, they become they get caregivers, like family becomes caregivers, and that family will then want to speak on behalf of that person. And that can create a conflict. We are working directly with the client. We want feedback from the client. We want to understand their interests, their needs, their abilities directly from them. So whenever possible, we want to have that direct communication with them. And in order to engage them and explore what that process might look like, there's a lot of different things that we can do. The first that comes to mind is an assistive technology evaluation. So part of our organization is the North Carolina Assistive Technology Program. They're like a sister agency to us. They fall under the Department of Health and Human Services umbrella. And we will let them know what's going on. We've got an individual with a brain injury, and we want to make sure we have open communication with them in a way that works best for them. So if the person is not able to speak as clearly as they like, they're having some difficulty finding the right words, or they're having slurred speech and they're feeling like they're not heard or understood, we want to find an alternative to that works well for them. We can accommodate and we can adapt to whatever that communication style might be. Sometimes it's just that they prefer to exchange emails so that there's a record of the conversation and they have time to draft out their response before hitting send. Sometimes it might be an assistive technology device where they're pressing buttons to give a quick, short answer. So it just really depends on what their preferred communication style is. Like I said, we can be flexible and we can adapt to match what that communication style is. Sometimes it's just working out a series of thumbs up, thumbs down, and asking yes or no questions. So whatever is working for them, we'll try to match that. Or if they don't know yet what's the most effective form of communication, then we will try to help them explore that. Certainly that would want to be figured out before we move into planning services, because we need to make sure that the services are accessible to them every step of the way, and that they have input and they have control over the decisions and services that are happening for them.
Yeah, I love the idea of kind of putting the individual in control of their own path, their own, goal, their own, whatever they're working towards. And I think I do see a lot of individuals tend to kind of like lose their voice in a way of being able to advocate for themselves and what they need. I think they do sometimes rely on their loved one, who is a wonderful advocator, very passionate and very, wants the best for their loved one, but focusing on the individual is one of the really key things to get personal buy-in, I'm sure, when it comes to someone achieving their goals. And so how do you suggest kind of engaging with the family members or support systems, kind of navigating it, taking their information into consideration, but maybe not as the main thing? I know sometimes families will come in and they want a certain goal and the other person wants a certain goal, and they're not necessarily the same one. So how have you had to navigate that, if at all?
So whenever the family's involved, and we absolutely encourage family involvement, we know that the process of recovering from a brain injury and returning to employment is a team effort, and we're not the only people that are part of that team with that client. The family and any natural supports are a vital part of that recovery process and returning to employment. First, we establish some ground rules and some expectations. A lot of times people will have guardianship, and certainly we recognize that and we take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, the client is the client. The family is not the client. So we want feedback directly from the client, and we are always going to advocate for what it is that they want or what they're needing from us. So we try to make it as open a conversation as possible. And a lot of times the client is the one that has the best perception of what it is that they can and can't do, and the family is pushing them to do more and go further too soon. So we just try to keep things in perspective and make sure they understand that we can continue to work to a goal. It's not a one-time thing. It's not you only get one shot with VR. You can have multiple cases over the course of the lifetime. So why don't we, focus on an attainable goal that's in front of us, master that, and then maybe we come back in 2 years and we try to build upon that and take it a little bit further. So making sure the family knows we are working for the client. We want their input and support. This works best if we're on the same page and we're working as a team. And we really just want to make sure they're respecting what it is that the client wants. So if the client has made a very clear vocalization that I want to work in the general public, and the family's saying, no, like people will understand your disability, or it'll be too high pressure, or you'll get too anxious, maybe we can ease some of those fears by doing that simulation, like I mentioned earlier, allowing them the opportunity to try it out before committing. And sometimes that alone is enough for the family to see that it is a good fit and they can do this. So it goes both ways. Sometimes families are a little too overeager to get them doing too much too quickly, and sometimes they don't have a clear idea of just how capable that person is or how quickly they can adapt in a new situation. So we just try to make sure that there are opportunities to find these things out along the way before committing to a job. And that usually is the best way to approach it, because the person then can go into an interview confidently and say, no, I can do this because I've tried it. And the family can support them because they've seen it for themselves. So we certainly want and value all family input. We recognize how important those family supports are. We just want to maintain a good working relationship and stay on the same page as much as possible.
Yeah, I feel like it's all about balance, that's for sure. You mentioned the interview process, and it got me thinking, how is that different for individuals with brain injury, or possibly just through VR in general? If someone has a job coach or anything, what does that process of, the exploration to interview to potentially securing a job, does that look different after a brain injury?
I think it looks a little bit different for anyone with a disability, especially if they have a visible disability or something that someone might recognize during an interview. So with job coaching, if they have a job coach, the job coach can certainly be a part of that interview if the employer and the client are both open and okay with that. Job coaching is considered a reasonable accommodation in the employment field. And so really no employer should be turning away a job coach during an interview unless they truly don't understand and they just need some education about what the purpose of the job coach is and how that process works. But a job coach can be a part of that interview. And what it might look like is a question gets asked during the interview, and if the client is struggling to comprehend or can't remember how they want to respond, the job coach isn't going to answer for them necessarily, but may rephrase the question and remind them that they've discussed that this question can come up in an interview and help them to recall a question that they had already rehearsed. Job coaches and VR counselors can often do a lot of research. It's pretty common that, especially with larger like retail stores or bigger companies, that they use the same interview questions over and over and over throughout the year. So oftentimes you can find those interview questions online, and so they can do a little bit more preparation for those interviews using those exact questions and knowing what to expect and having some rehearsed answers. And there's nothing wrong with that. It shows that that person is very interested in that job and that they, they're doing the work in advance to show that they're a great candidate because of how much they value the opportunity. Sometimes you can do interviews virtually. So if somebody's really nervous about like going in person, you can ask for a virtual interview, and you can ask for all kinds of accommodations, maybe even questions in advance. If it's like a mom and pop type place and you explain, I've got this candidate, I see you have an opening, I think this is a great fit, but I gotta tell you, my person does not interview well, they get too nervous. We tend to find that some of those smaller employers will be willing to be flexible and give that person an opportunity and whatever may work for them. We've also done video resumes. So if you know that somebody does poorly in an interview, but they can present themselves really well in other circumstances, doing like a video resume and asking generic interview type questions as part of that video resume to give that employer an idea of how they would respond normally in an interview situation. So coming up with some really creative solutions to make sure that they have an opportunity to put their best foot forward, whatever that situation may look like. So making sure they are prepared, that they're not caught off guard by interview questions, mock interviews, alternative interview styles, support during the interview. Those are all things that we can help with. And usually the best case scenario is that the connection from the client to the employer has already been made through either a job coach, a VR counselor, or a business relations representative. So a business relations representative, their role is essentially to find employment opportunities in the community in an integrated setting for our consumers and help them get their foot in the door. So it's not like a cold call, somebody calling for the first time saying, hi, I'm interested in a job there. Do you have any openings? The business rep would be doing that for them and figuring out what the needs of the business are. And if they identify that there's a gap in the business need and that we've got a candidate, bridging that gap so that the employer is excited about our candidate, and that if they have any questions they're uncomfortable asking the candidate, they might ask them to the business rep who can kind of explain to them, what it's like to work with someone who has a disability and how they could be accommodated, but how we're very confident that this is a good fit for them.
Yeah, those relationships are definitely really key, and forming those relationships and having that open communication between anybody involved in the employment world is really, really essential. I wonder, do you come across a lot of people that have difficulty with the kind of disclosure process? I know that some people, don't want to disclose whether or not they have a disability or brain injury that might impact their work. Some people are totally fine with it. How do you tend to navigate those different experiences? Because everyone's kind of comfort level with that might be a little bit different depending on, who they are and their experiences.
Yeah, so when it comes to disclosure, VR staff are never going to disclose somebody's disability. It has to be the client's choice. And if they decide to disclose, it really needs to come from them, but we can help them through that process, guide them, coach them, figure out, what's the best way to disclose the disability and how to ask for appropriate accommodations. I always recommend that clients don't shy away from disclosing. I've seen a lot of situations where people don't disclose because they want to do the job without accommodations and without having to tell anyone. And then they kind of get into a sticky situation where they can't perform the job as expected without an accommodation. And it's like, now you've got to backtrack and then disclose and then ask for accommodations, all while still trying to maintain that job. So I'm a fan of disclosing up front after a job offer before you start the job. But there are also a lot of applications that ask, can you perform this job with or without reasonable accommodations? And the first step to disclosing is often saying, yes, I can perform this job with or without reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations could be job coaching. It could be using an assistive technology device to communicate with a supervisor or perform your tasks. So in most situations, it can really only help you start that job off on a good foot if your disability may impact you in doing those tasks. Now, for some people, their disability is not going to impact them on that particular job in any way, shape, or form. It may just be they need more off-site job coaching to manage stress, to make sure they're remembering their schedule, that they're staying organized, they're showing up on time. All those are things happening kind of behind the scenes that may not come into play while on the job. So they may not need to disclose. But for those where we know that the limitations are going to impact how they do that job and how they perform it, we recommend disclosing up front and just giving them the courage and walking them through what that process looks like. And sometimes if they'll give us permission, we can meet with their human resources at their place of employment with them to guide them through that process and be that extra level of support. I did have an individual with a brain injury once who did not disclose, and after a second written warning at work, came back to VR and said, I'm going to lose my job. I didn't disclose. And they told me, I was going to be written up for not doing my job. And then I said, well, I have a disability. And then they had to backtrack and get all this documentation about the disability. And just to speed up the process, we got consent to talk with HR, and we provided some information from the physician about the nature of the disability and what accommodations were recommended. And we were able to get those put in place fairly quickly, brought back in a job coach to kind of retrain, make sure that things were up to expectations. And then as soon as the employer said, yep, everything is improved, this is working really well for us. And the client said, this is much better working environment for me now with these accommodations, then we faded away again.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a complicated process, but earlier tends to be a little bit better. But any time in order to keep a job would probably be the best time for sure. Yeah. And so as we kind of close out, I just have about maybe 2 or more questions, just kind of more big general questions. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts or advice for other professionals who are working with individuals with brain injury? Maybe they're a little bit intimidated by the things that they've heard about people with brain injury, or like the stigma associated around it, and maybe they're like, oh no, I don't work with people with brain injuries, or maybe it's a little bit outside their field. What advice would you have for those individuals?
Yeah, I know there's a phrase in the disability field, usually pertains to autism, but if you've worked with one person with autism, you've worked with one person with autism. And I feel like that absolutely applies to someone with a brain injury. You've worked with one person with a brain injury, you've worked with one person with a brain injury, because no 2 brain injuries are the same. My best piece of advice would be to be patient. Recovery looks so different for everyone. The timeline for everyone is so different. This is not something you get into expecting success overnight. But the most complex, difficult cases are the ones that come with the greatest satisfaction at the end, because you put so much time and research and energy into this person's success, and to see them manifest their employment goal and find that confidence and that self-worth is definitely worth being patient in the long run. And you know that they're going to be comfortable coming back to you if anything changes, or if there are any issues on the job, they're going to be comfortable coming back to you to let you know, so that you can jump back in and make sure that they have those supports that they need. So being patient, knowing that no 2 people are going to be the same throughout this process, and not being afraid to ask for help. There are going to be situations you get into as a professional where you're really at a loss. You've never been in this situation before. You're not sure how to approach this. You want to, maintain professionalism, but you want to help this person, make the next step forward and make progress. Seek guidance, seek support from a mentor, from a supervisor, from another professional in the field. There's so many people out there in this field, and we're not always visible sometimes when we're behind the scenes, but there are people out there who you can talk to and who'll be willing to guide you and give you the resources that you need in order to get through a rough patch with a client to make sure that they can then make progress towards their employment goals.
Excellent advice. That's definitely good. And my last question is for any of those individuals that are maybe listening, watching right now, that are living with a brain injury. They're thinking about going back to work. They're not really sure how. Is there any advice that you can kind of give them to give them the courage or kind of help them take those next steps? What advice would you have for those individuals that are, or maybe those that are struggling right now at a place of employment and not sure where to go next?
Be mindful that we are ready whenever you are. We know that sometimes people come to us and they're not ready, and that's okay. We're going to walk that path with you. And if we're, a couple months in and you're just saying, you know what, I don't think I'm there yet, that's okay. We're not going to take it personally or be offended if you want to take a step back or say, you know what, I just need to call it quits for a little bit. I'll come back to it when I'm ready. We will still be here when you're ready. Vocational Rehabilitation just celebrated 100 years as an agency last year, and we don't anticipate going anywhere anytime soon. So whenever that person is ready, we will be there. It's a long process. It's not something that happens overnight. So the earlier you start that process, the sooner you're going to see some progress and some services that lead towards employment. But because it is a process, if you're thinking about it or you're wanting to explore what it might look like for you, it's never too early to start. We are going to do lots of assessments and evaluations to make sure that we're putting you in the right direction. And we're navigating that process with you. And we want to give you opportunity to try a few different things if you're really unsure of what direction to go in or what kind of work you want to do. So the earlier you start, then the less pressure you might feel throughout the process, and go into it with an open mind that sometimes we'll ask you to do assessments or try jobs that you're like, there's no way I can do it, but just trust that your counselor knows what they're doing and that they have your best interest at heart, and that they want to help you maximize your potential. And sometimes we see the potential of the client even when the client doesn't. And we just want to make sure that you understand what you're also capable of. So be patient. We will be here when you're ready, and just be ready to walk that process with us so we can help you reach your goal.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Are there any other final thoughts that you have that we didn't get to or that you want to make sure people know?
Not that I can think of. I would just say that vocational rehabilitation, I feel, is a hidden gem. Not a lot of people know about us unless it's word of mouth, or maybe you learned about us in a meeting with other community agencies, or you heard about it in high school. It's never too late to start with vocational rehabilitation. There are no limit to the number of times you can come to us for assistance throughout your lifetime. And it's a partnership. So we are matching your energy. So if you are really committed and involved in this process, we're going to be right there with you. If you're wanting to take it a little bit slower, one day at a time, we're going to match that pace and we're going to walk it slowly with you. If you are open and honest with us that you struggle with motivation and staying engaged, let us know. We want to be able to be that motivation and keep you engaged. It really starts with an open, honest conversation about what you need. We're not here to judge. We are not here to scold or reprimand. We're here to walk that path with you. And we want to do it in a way that makes you as comfortable as possible. And we want to do it in a way that helps you get towards that job goal. and it looks so differently from everybody. So if you heard somebody had a negative experience or you heard somebody got a certain service, it may be very different for you because you're going to have a very different set of circumstances and your disability impacts you differently. But whenever you're ready, BR is going to be there for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This was just a wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited to be able to share it with the world, because I think that there's a lot of just either misconceptions or just not as much information, like you said, with BR being a hidden gem. And there's so much more to the process and more supports that are available, that if anyone's out there struggling or having a difficult time or just not sure where to go next to be able to achieve their goals, there are resources out there. It's being able to connect with them, being open and honest, being patient. But there are people that are out there that are there to help individuals with brain injury, their families, and professionals out there. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.